Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. We're really excited to be here and chat a little bit about the kind of work we do. I think to sort of just set context about some of the things that we're going to talk about and what we all sort of bring to the table from our roles and sorts of points of view. We were thinking about like, how do we sort of start and give you a picture of what this world looks like? And one way I think we can do that we're going to touch on is what an ideal world might look like from sort of the beginning of building and creating something all the way in from sort of conceiving an idea all the way to implementing and building it, and working with folks like yourself who come from engineering backgrounds and things like that. So a bit of an idea of like, what does ideal look like and where do folks like researchers, product managers, and designers sort of come together to make that ideal happen. And then we'll talk a little bit about, I guess, what we actually do and where we try to aspire for ideal as much as possible. So just thinking about that idea of ideal or perfection the best way of doing things, something that I think we like to think about from, especially as a researcher, is taking a very user-centric approach to building and solving problems for whoever your user group might be. And a lot of that typically starts with trying to really connect and understand what it is the users you're working with really need. So at the FT, we have a lot of different users depending on the types of experiences and products that they engage with that we build. But something that we try to do is start off by really trying to understand what it is that they're doing with something like the FT, what kinds of problems do they encounter that the FT helps them solve, what kinds of things do they do in their regular life that the FT doesn't necessarily fit into, but we can understand more about how we build the right product for them from learning from them. So we try to do this sort of unmet needs analysis of just getting a sense of who our people, who our users are, and really building a foundation of information and knowledge about them, what motivates them, how they feel, what their lifestyle and sort of attitudes look like, with all sorts of things in relation to the types of problems we work in, whether it's news, information, insight, knowledge, whatever kind of way you want to slice and dice that. And we try to take a big picture approach and understand those things and then try to filter that down into building and solving for those problems. And that's where research and product management and design sort of really collaborate to try to solve those problems. So as a researcher, something I would potentially start by doing is what we would call some kind of larger scale generative research. And by generative, I mean trying to understand things to then generate ideas from there to start thinking about and building. And there's not a one size fits all perfect way to do this, and every team will sort of operate differently, but this gives us a really wide understanding of problems and spaces that we have an opportunity to play in and build really exciting, interesting products to solve our users' needs that we've uncovered. So we do that by very often conducting interviews. Sometimes when possible, we like to do those interviews in context, whether that's in people's workplaces, in their homes. But obviously in the last few years, post-pandemic and just with constraints and stuff, we sometimes will run those virtually as well. Just trying to build context of these people's lives, surveys, other kinds of testing tools to gather that insight. And then from there, we try to collect that information and put together a sense of opportunities and ideas of where we can sort of think about focusing our attention. And that's where typically we will be working with designers and product managers at the same time to think about how do we use these insights or these learnings that we've picked up from research to at the same time solve for business needs and goals and outcomes that we as an organization need to think about. And then also, how do we take that into an interactive or like actual solution rather than just this problem to solve on a piece of paper or a slide deck. So our colleagues in product management and design make this happen. They sort of bring it to life from what we hear out in the field. And so that sort of starts the ongoing continued product development process in one sense. And we're sort of iteratively working together to think about ways to test ideas, build ideas that make the most sense for the business and the user, and then sort of consistently going through that until we reach a point where we have confidence in what we're thinking about, that we've tested it a few times, and then we can commit to really dedicating time and resources towards building this. And throughout this conversation, folks like yourself in engineering can be brought in to get opinions and feasibility and understand what the constraints of ideas we're thinking about building might be. So it's a very sort of ongoing collaborative process that everyone's input and sort of experience and expertise really helps to form a kind of sensible or strategic way of working on something new or a product or a feature, whatever scale it might be. So that is I would say those are some aspects of what good might look like from sort of beginning to continued development. And of course, I'm skipping quite a few steps that are conversations that happen back and forth, but I think I can hand over to Sian now to talk a little bit about like what the nitty-gritty aspects of those kinds of conversations look like and considerations and things to keep in mind that we all, I guess, specifically from our roles and backgrounds.
Yeah, thanks so much, Samarth. Hi guys, thanks so much for having me. I'm just going to go through a little bit on like what a PM would kind of classically do and what I kind of do day to day, and then get into a bit about how we would interact together and kind of what you can kind of expect from me. So I was thinking when I was making this, like, what do I actually do on a day to day? And the main thing that I do is I talk to a lot of stakeholders. These are the people that are the most like invested in your product that you're building, usually because their product will directly impact kind of their team and their goals. So you'll have a lot of work in progress that they're interested in, and you kind of need to keep them updated on how that's going, if it's planned, and like if the timelines that we've agreed upon are going to be followed, on things that we have already shipped, so things that are in production, and need to kind of communicate the metrics on those and see how well it's doing from a feature perspective. Is it performing how we thought it would? Is it underperforming? What's kind of going on there? And then as well, keep them updated on like the features and the products that are coming down the pipeline. So yeah, and things don't always go to plan. So you kind of need to be able to manage their expectations at every kind of turn. But if we take it a step back, one of the first things that we try and do, at least continually, is vision setting with products. This is kind of like the highest level, and you're looking at the vision of the products you own. These tend to be very, as you might think, visionary and a little far-fetched, but it's trying to get everyone aligned on what the future of that product might be. And it's also a really good tool to kind of align stakeholders to make sure that you're always going in the right direction. It also helps obviously align like research and design and engineers as well in their thinking, so they can plan for each iteration with the end kind of vision in mind. That vision is always changing, and it should always change. And that's something that's like a document you should really always kind of revert back to. That's best practice. It doesn't happen a lot because it's a lot of work, but it's a good tool to kind of make sure everyone's aligned. Some good examples, this is from Lyft in 2016, so it's a while ago, and Lyft didn't do amazingly. So, you know, product vision isn't always the main thing, but some things that they had in theirs was by 2025, private car ownership will all but end in major US cities. And as a result, cities' physical environments will change more than we've ever experienced in our lifetime. So they're kind of like the vision setting stuff that products kind of would like aim for. But then, you know, vision doesn't do everything. So you kind of need to take it a step lower and also work with your team in order to get those delivered. And that kind of goes into like road mapping and OKR setting, which is kind of objective and key results, which is the kind of step down, and you're looking at what are the areas that we're going to tackle, what are the problem areas that our users face, and that also gets stakeholders kind of aligned on the work and features that the engineering teams are kind of going to undertake in the next quarter or next couple of quarters. So yeah, to try and figure out what these are, you're taking a lot of stuff from research, what they've kind of done in their like general research around your users and what their main pain points are. You're also looking at a lot of metrics on like product dashboards, such as like amplitude, where you can look at where maybe conversion's dropping, and that needs to have a little look into, or like I said before, features might not be doing as well as you had expected, and you might want to look on how we could pivot that, or maybe improve it in a next iteration. And it's also taken on a lot of what stakeholders want as well. So you really have to kind of understand what your stakeholders want, as well as what the business wants, as well as what your users want, and kind of bring it all together and agree and like make sure kind of everyone's agreed on the next steps. Because what stakeholders want doesn't necessarily line up to kind of what the users might be feeding back. And it also might not be in line with the business direction either. So you kind of have to battle all of those things out. So yeah. And then, yeah, OKRs, they're basically just rough goals for what you want to achieve that quarter. They should be well understood issues. So research and design should really know kind of what is what's required of them. We know what's going on. We know what the iteration looks like. This is rarely the case. You tend to know what's happening at the beginning of your quarter, and then the end of your quarter, you just have no idea. And you'll hopefully research and design will come together and help you out to figure out what the end of the quarter is going to look like. But you have a rough idea of like the problem area you want to tackle. And then, yeah, so that's kind of like a quick summary of like the different things that I do in a day. Obviously, not all of that would happen in a day. It's kind of spread out and kind of just depends on which part of the quarter you're in that you need to really focus on in the different areas. But then getting down to more of like the ins and outs, like how I would really be working with you guys, and engineering. Engineering would feed in quite a lot to OKRs. We kind of lean on you guys, and especially like lead engineers, to help us with managing expectations. Like, is it too much? Is it too little? Like, we wouldn't show our like objectives and key results to stakeholders until the team has looked at them and kind of said to us like, you're crazy, we can't do that in a quarter, or like, no, that seems about right. Yeah, that's good. We've got enough resources for that. We understand the problems well, and kind of go on from that. But then when you look at the specific feature levels, you're looking at like product requirements documents and kind of listing out the context of the problem that you're looking to solve, any use cases that you are looking to solve with that, and any like basic requirements that you feel the feature needs to kind of answer, as well as like maybe an acceptance criteria, if that's kind of how your team works. And you kind of go through that, and you'd summarize all of that together, and you'd make sure that it's well understood by the engineers and by design. That would have fed in a lot of work from research, and also from stakeholders. Everyone would kind of review that document, and that is kind of the bottom level from like PMs, and that's kind of when you hand it over to engineering to kind of flesh out their technical requirements and spec up tickets, etc. And then you kind of go into the delivery side of it. So this is more like your everyday. You'll have your like either daily or like every other day stand-ups, checking in and making sure that that work in progress that has kind of come from your OKRs and that you've informed your stakeholders that is going to get done, is where you report back on the delivery of those things. Are things going as we expected? Are they not? Do we have a blocker? Are there something that's not well understood, and that you guys need more context on? Is there designs missing? Is there a use case that you don't really understand and you want to talk to a user or a researcher to understand a little bit more about why that requirement's there? So yeah, and then the stuff that you should kind of come to me for to understand a little bit better is like the context of a ticket. Why are we doing this work in the first place? And to be honest, if you get to a ticket and you're like, I have no idea what's going on, that is kind of the failing of the PM. We should be keeping you informed throughout the whole thing. You should never just have a ticket on your plate that you have to do. You should have seen this ticket a couple times before. You should understand the context to that. So if you ever get a ticket on your plate and you're like, I have no idea what's going on, like, please, just reach out to the PM and be like, I'm so sorry, like, I don't really know what's going on. And then the PM will definitely ask for some feedback on how to make that process a little better for you, so you don't have to just jump into a ticket and not really understand what's going on, which is something that like retros are super key for, and are just like golden for a PM. So you can improve that kind of process between PMs and engineering and research and design. So yeah, you're never lost in the weeds. That's kind of the rundown. I feel like that was probably a lot, and I've probably missed quite a bit too, but hopefully that was a good little overview. And should I pass on to Eva? Yeah.
Hi. I'm Eva. I'm going to talk a little bit about the relationship between product designers and engineers, as well as how I myself like collaborate with other disciplines within a team, and a little bit about what I do and like what you can come to me for. So as a product designer, my role revolves around like creating, hopefully, meaningful and user-centric experiences. So it's not just about having something that looks good, although like ideally it should, but it should also like, it has to be functional. And I'm always striving to kind of, for it to be intuitive. So ideally like a user would like look at a screen or go through a journey and not have to think about where to go or what to do. They'll just be going about their task without a second's thought. So my goal as a designer is to really think about the point where design and psychology, I guess, intersect, and how to get people through a journey with as much understanding and as little friction as possible. So every shape, every angle, every word, every color choice, like I have to think about all those elements that a person sees, and I have to think about like where to put it. And that goes for like every page, every click. So yeah, it's as hard as it is fun, I guess. But my personal experience has been largely in startups. So my job in a smaller company used to always kind of involve conducting the user research myself, and always like doing the user testing for like new prototypes or like previously released products and features. So if you do like end up at a startup, you'll be going to a product designer to get all that good stuff. But here at the FT, I'd be teaming up with someone like Samarth to do this, and like leaning on them heavily. My job consists of a lot of sketching and ideation and design planning. And at the beginning of a new project, I'll be coming up with wireframes or designs, pretty like lo-fi, so not very like defined and designed, but I would start to do something really quickly at that point and take that to like the PM and the engineer, and kind of do reviews and the research, and do reviews and kind of check them all together and make sure that we're all on the same page. And it's at this point that like feedback is super crucial and welcome, and also questions, lots of questions, because this is the time to kind of, I guess, get them all out. And not every designer, I think, would agree with me, but this is like my favorite part, because like engineers, for instance, in my past have like asked me, oh, have you thought about a user coming in from this slightly different entry point, or have you thought about this weird edge case that might not happen all the time, but it's super important? And at this stage I'd be like, no, I definitely haven't. Let me go back and add to the designs and like tweak them and make them like infinitely better because of like the questions that you've just like now raised. So that's the time to do it, I guess, ideally. So yeah, please ask questions at this phase and make suggestions, and as early as possible in the process. As the more time that I have to think about it, and we all have to think about like the solution and the design for it, like the better for everyone. In an ideal world, kind of during the early stages of a project, I would collaborate closely with the engineers to kind of explore and define like product like requirements, and with the PM and the constraints, like we would all do that together. And in this perfect world, involving engineers early on, that would really help me kind of develop a deeper understanding of like the technical limitations, like performance considerations, and like the feasibility challenges, and how and where to like track the metrics, and like on what buttons, or CTAs, like the call to actions, like what to, you know, all that sort of stuff. But the speed and the timings of projects, that doesn't always get to happen in that order and in the order that you want. So it's kind of really great to be aware of that fact and make sure that like you will kind of communicate about where everyone is with their workload, and on like what timeline. And sometimes it will be like way out of whack, and I'll still be kind of doing designs, and engineering might kind of need stuff to be getting on with. So it's all kind of, it is a bit of a a jigsaw piece, and it will be, the challenge is kind of trying to figure it all out together. And in the past, I have had conversations around like, well, okay, like, is there some heavy back end stuff that you could be getting on with first, or is there some exploratory work that would help us like further down the line that we could all kind of sit down and discuss like now, as to like, you could maybe start thinking about those things while I'm like carrying on my work. I've also given engineers like fixes on funky looking designs, and gone, okay, well, I'm not ready to give you the stuff that I know that you need, but I have this design file of stuff that kind of needs fixing on the front end. So technically like easier stuff, like on a current design, like, do you fancy doing that? And I'll be ready to like send you stuff soon. So yeah, there's always that like juggle to consider. And other than like timelines not aligning, and the challenge of like managing like the time and the priorities, some other challenges that product designers will experience will be kind of this idea of like designing for scale, and flexibility, and trying to kind of anticipate future kind of requirements, and building kind of flexibility into the designs. As like one of the things that I need to be aware of is like trying to prevent rework, and kind of leaning into like the product evolution. So it's always like, what does the user need now, but actually like from a business perspective, and from a stakeholder perspective, like where do we want to go, and what does that world look like, and how do I design something for now that will like potentially work for the future. So all like this all has to kind of be done alongside designing for accessibility and inclusivity, and kind of trying to create something that can be used by a diverse audience. But one of the biggest ones for me is this idea of like balancing creativity with the constraints that exist. So not only like technical ones, but you know, there will be budget implications and timelines and resource, and these would be all the conversations that I'd be like having, like being on top of and having with the PM and other stakeholders. And I'm actually the only designer at the FT here that's spread across 4 teams. So balancing like multiple projects and the deadlines of that can be demanding. So the thing that I guess I want to like call out as the most important thing for me as a designer, although I think it could be argued that it might be true for everyone, but it's this idea of like really effective communication. I feel like this is the case, especially like with engineering, because as personally, like not everyone finds this. It depends like what your background is in. But for me, like coding is the furthest like knowledge base away from my own. So for me, and for like a few other designers I know, like it's super important to like communicate a lot and often with engineering, like everyone, but for me, engineering, to kind of make sure that like the technical feasibility is always there. And that I'm kind of designing something that isn't out of scope and isn't going to like take years to build, because design wise, I don't want to like spend my time designing something that was always going to get shot down due to it just not being like a viable design, like a good idea. But because I deal with like anything and everything like centered around the user and design, there are a bunch of things that you can come and ask me about, or someone like me, at any point during a project. So these things might include questions about like, what's the problem we're actually aiming to solve for users, or Like, what are the specific needs and pain points? Is there maybe like already existing design assets or wireframes or prototypes that you could like use as a reference? Because sometimes, you know, you'll be working on a project, but I'll have had designs from previous work that might be useful, and I might not think to like show them to you. So that's always a good question. Or it could be something along the lines of like, can you walk me through the design decisions you made for this project and like the rationale behind them? It really does like depend on what stage of the journey you find yourself being involved in as an engineer. Like ideally it's from the beginning, but questions about the why will always be welcome. And I come from startup world where teams are much smaller, and this has meant for me in the past that like we're more tightly knit and the teams work much closer together, whereas in larger organizations like this, we are in different departments, and as a result, like communication is sometimes a little bit slower. That's just like the nature of it, and work comes to you like slightly more fully formed potentially than in startups, where you might be working through a problem space together right from the very beginning. But whatever questions you need to ask, I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, don't like be scared to ask them. Like the more you know about the task before you start writing code, the better. And yeah, if you have input or an idea that you think will like make the product better in the long run, like all the better, I guess. Yeah, I hope that's useful. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Hearing about all of like your roles and what you do was super interesting. So thank you so much. If anyone's got any questions, please do pop them in the chat. We've had some really interesting questions come in, which is really nice. One question I do want to ask all of you is how you got into your role and your journey to where you got to today. Because for me, people's journeys and the roles you've done previously and how you got to it is always super interesting. So yeah, if everyone could share that would be really interesting.
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine is it's a little interesting. Like I did history and philosophy at uni and then graduated and I was like, great, now what? And I did everything like PR and marketing and just a bunch of stuff that I didn't really enjoy. And it was around the first like recession and I just kept losing my job. And then I thought, wouldn't it be nice if like I lost a job that I cared about? So I retrained as a graphic designer and I did like a 3-month course, got a portfolio together, went for this job interview in Bristol, turned out like to be the only one there for like years. Like there was just not many jobs in design. And the company didn't ask me how long I'd been doing it for. And I didn't tell them because I just had this portfolio. So yeah, I got the job and did graphic design for a few years. So got a good like foundation in like UI, I guess, like user interface. And then moved into a startup, a financial startup, where there were user experience people. And I was like, oh my God, this is like a job that I never knew I always wanted, because I was always interested in psychology and always used to think in those ways, but I didn't know a job existed because I went in as like a visual designer, I guess, coming from graphic design. And then the UX guy left and the CTO said to me, do you want to try doing a product design job? We'll give you like a month, but like to be fair, like if you suck, like you're gonna have to go. But do you want to try it? Because it's such a small company and like they didn't have the money and they were like trying to. So I was like, yeah, sure. And I think they thought that I had like troubles with my stomach, because I always used to like slink off to like the bathroom and like sit there and like Google like what's a UX, like what all these like terms, because I didn't want to seem like I didn't know what I was doing. But I was like, I basically learned on the job. So that whole year I was learning, doing and working with engineers and product designers and kind of worked my way up from there. So it's kind of like not a straight journey in.
A real deep immersion into product design. Sian, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so I joined a startup kind of after my master's because I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do. My undergrad was econ and finance. My postgrad was in policy. And I was like, where do I go from here? And I knew, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I was like, I'll join a startup and then I can figure it out and move around. So I joined as like a junior ops person in a fintech, and kind of like Eva, like worked my way up. I kind of expressed, I didn't really know product was a thing. I didn't know it existed. I had no idea. And the CPO kind of joined a couple of weeks after I joined this fintech, and I just kind of wanted to hear more about it. And I asked her what it was. Yeah, and then maybe like a year and a bit after, she had grown out the product team, and they were, because I had been in operations and I kind of knew the business quite well, they were like, do you want to try out this product thing? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I'll give it a go. And similarly, yeah, I was kind of still doing my ops role as well as like learning on the job with the product role. Did a Scrum course just to kind of know the terminology and the language. But other than that, kind of, yeah, being thrown straight in and figuring it out as I went along. And then it kind of went into a full product role a couple of months after, which was great. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it.
Thank you. Samarth?
Yeah, so my background in uni was in journalism primarily, and was actually very curious and interested in the world of like reporting and writing and you know, stories of like all kinds, and just trying to be part of that process. And tried it out. Don't think the newsroom was like perfectly suited for me in terms of just the timeline and cadence of things. So I was actually quite keen to work in like the marketing, brand strategy, ad space kind of for a bit, and tried that out as well. And there were elements of it that I really enjoyed, but it just didn't fully click. And then I sort of stumbled a little bit into user research, but not super connected directly to the product development process. So my first couple of jobs were all sort of consulting and agency driven. So it was a lot of doing research and kind of customer insights kind of work at a level to provide like our clients from all sorts of industries with just ideas of like who these people were, why they do these things, and how that can impact like a company's sort of 5-year or 7-year innovation pipeline, for example. So it was really like very deep, in-depth kind of research work. And I really enjoyed the consulting sort of model, where it was just sort of hopping between industries and learning a lot of things about them. But after, and it was I think a really great way to sort of build up a research toolkit in a field that I was not, I'd sort of learned from like journalism how to talk and interview people, but very different outputs. You know, if you're writing a story or producing, you know, video or audio or something, you ask and think about questions in slightly different way. And then you have to be thoughtful about ethics and how you use things. And of course, those are questions that are important in a business context as well. But so working in that consulting space really sort of helped me build my chops, so to speak, with how to do research and like how to talk to people and go into people's homes and, you know, interview them and follow them around as they like show you random elements of what's in their cupboards, and all sorts of really, really exciting, really interesting kinds of looks into like people and how they think and operate. And then, yeah, transitioning into this role at the FT, where I'm sort of embedded in a product team. And in the consulting world, I was working directly with product managers and brand people and strategy people, but they were my clients. So there was a little bit of gap and distance. And now being embedded, even though the types of people I am working with are similar, it's a very different sort of ownership of taking the sort of product forward from like what you learn from user. And something I didn't mention while I was sort of setting things up earlier was just around trying to translate like what you hear from people and then decoding that by talking to a lot of people, gathering information, and then making what you heard and observed insightful to the people you work with. So that's designers, product managers, engineers. So it's not just, oh, X person does Y thing. It's taking a look at why X person does that and what that means for what we work on. So sort of being that voice of the customer in a sense, but equally sort of translating that and being able to sort of wear different hats and talk to different people to take what you learn from what a user is doing out in the world, and then how that sort of matches and marries with the business. Yeah, so sort of stumbled into it, which I think is quite the story for a lot of product and design. And yeah.
What's interesting is all of you have this degree, but none of you are in the thing that you studied for, which is quite interesting. I'm wondering if there's anyone here who's listened to you and gone, oh, I really want to do that, but they're not sure how to get into it. Do you have any advice for, maybe a junior product manager, or, a junior researcher, or a junior, product designer? Do you have any advice for anyone here who, is watching this and maybe thinking that this is something for them? And that's to anyone and all of you.
Yeah, I think it's basically kind of what you said. There's a lot of, I know in London, there's a lot of networking for like product and tech to kind of hop along to those, but also probably find a startup in an industry you're very interested in and like write into them. Your cover letter will kind of come off really well in that case. And yeah, there's a lot of startups, and obviously startups are not very stable, but there's a lot, like there's a lower bar to entry in them, and they're willing to take on people who have like a vested interest in the product that they're building. And if you have an interest in the product that you're building, it just makes it, in my opinion anyway, it just makes the interview process so much easier. From someone that has interviewed where I couldn't care less about the product. It just makes the interview process so much easier when you actually care about that product. So going in as a junior or even like a junior business analyst and working around, yeah, just get the foot in the door, I guess, is kind of I think is what we all did.
Yeah, I second that. Like at my previous role at a startup called Koru Kids, there was actually a specific role that the CEO used to hire for, which was like an all-rounder. So you could just go in and just be like, if you're just like passionate about like not so much what they did because it was childcare, but like about how the company was like run, and if like the mission was strong enough, she was like, come and interview and then spend like a couple of months or like a quarter in each like section of the company and see like what you like, what you're good at, and then like we'll go from there. So there are startups I think that like do that as well, that again, it's just getting your foot in the door and really understanding like the whole business. And if you're not quite sure if it's for you, I think it's a really good way to kind of like try it out and just double check before you you do anything else, to be like, oh no, this this is really what I want to do. So yeah,
that's such a good way to like give someone experience in the real world, but not restricting them to a particular role. I think that's such a good idea from that startup to do that.
It's amazing. So many amazing people have come from that as well, where
yeah.
they, after a year, they're like, I want to be a PM, and then now they are, and they're amazing, and they just get all the support, and they can learn. And while actually that it makes them stronger because they're in all the different like parts of the business as well. So they're in ops for a little bit, and so yeah, it makes them stronger.
I bet they have then such a good all-round idea of what's going on in the company, because even as a developer and you join the FT or another company, you are just the developer. I've worked in companies and I have no idea what's going on in other departments. So actually that's such a good idea, spending like a few months with all these different teams.
People go to them and it's like, what's happening? Because like they're the ones that like know. And we've had lots of instances of like people that have worked in ops that the company have then trained up to be engineers, like paid for their like courses, and now they're engineers. So yeah, startups are definitely a good place. I second one.
Yes, Samarth, do you have anything
Yeah,
else
I only wanted to add that, and I think this will very much depend on role and context, but yeah, I would totally echo what Sean and Eva have said, which is like experience and being in the right place to put your foot in the door. I think the only thing I would add is like hard skills in some cases, or just I guess the best practices. And I think courses, whether they're online or other places, can sometimes just like give you structured ways of like the best way to do things. I think I've seen this like with researchers that I've worked with before and things like that. You can build the skill set, but by just constant repetition and, you know, being put in an environment to do that. But you have to always be conscious, I think, of like bad habits that you can pick up if you haven't been like quote unquote taught the like right way to do it. And that can depend a lot on context and situations, but yeah, it is just it's like it can be a bit of a balancing act of like constantly exposing yourself to like new things and growing as you like take on new challenges, but then trying to ground that at some point, I guess, in, if it's applicable, like skill-based learning too. Yeah.
Are there any courses that you could recommend to people now?
No
pressure if not. We can always let people know after.
I remember it's been a while since I've taken a look, but I'd used some of those like online course sites like Coursera that have like those very large like kind of engage as deep as you want, and those are always nice for context setting and just getting some background. But I know some people have used like General Assembly. I don't know. I can't comment on like other fields and stuff, but there are places, right? Yeah.
I guess also YouTube is such a powerful tool nowadays. Like so many people are putting out such great content that I guess YouTube is really useful as well. I was wondering if each of you, and this is quite a hard question to answer, but if each of you could describe what a typical day looks like for you. And yeah, Samarth, you can go first.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, well, that's an excellent question that very much changes based on the month, the quarter, or week. But typically, I think some of like my core things to think about or responsibilities or things that I would like be thinking on a daily basis. So if I'm running research at the moment, and that would be, let's say, like we can talk about a specific product or feature that we're trying to build, or we're curious about exploring a concept about, some of the key things I'm thinking about on a day-to-day are like, okay, how are we gonna first talk to these people? So we have to engage with what are called like recruiters and third-party agencies that will help us sometimes set up interviews and contact people and get people in line to start these sort of engagements. And then going from there to sort of building out plans for how we want to execute that research, the types of questions we want to ask. And this is where we really seek feedback from all the rest of the team, everyone from PMs to designers, engineers, getting everyone on board about like, hey, this is what we're curious about learning about. We'd love your input. And then going from there to actually running some of those interviews. But none of this happens in like one day. It's spread over like a week. And yeah, the types of things you'd be doing in an interview setting or like a usability test online, analyzing that, it can really, really change the kind of headspace you're in. Yeah.
For me, a day, bear in mind, I've been at the FT for about 3 months now, and I've been working like on strategy and not like within teams, but I have worked a little bit, but this is kind of a mishmash of like startup stuff and enterprise. But I'd start off the day with a stand-up with the PM and the engineers. We talk about what we did the previous day and what the plan is for the day at hand, based on like a board with like all the tickets. So we all know like what we're doing for that day. Then I'd go away and try and do that thing that I said I was going to do, which would probably hopefully entail some sort of design. And if I'd finished that, I would then potentially try and reach out to another designer just to like sense check it and just be like, am I, you know, if I'm struggling with something, I would go to another designer and just ask for help. Or if it was something where I wasn't sure if it was like a viable thing, I'd get in touch with one of the engineers and be like, am I on the right lines for this? In the past, we've designed and coded at the same time. So I'd set up a call, and it would just be easier to do that sometimes rather than design it and then send it off. We'd be like on a call together being like, and I could see them coding and moving it, and we'd do it like that for speed. Other times a day would also include making notes. So if there was like a researcher doing an interview with someone on screen, I'd be the note taker to try and like help things out. And also it's super useful for me to be like there in real time and to like watch it happen and also learn from the researchers how they like ask questions in a non-leading way, which is something I had to learn to do. So yeah, I would help them take notes, and then the day might finish up with like sending sending Figma files. So if I was creating something for engineers, if it wasn't like just on a piece of paper or like a quick sketch, if we already knew what we were doing, like further down in the project, if it was like a project where it needed high fidelity, I would do something on Figma and send them the link, and then set up a meeting to like go through it, because sometimes just looking at a design, you'd be like, well, what is that? So I would set up a meeting as well to like be like, this was my thought going through, like, what do you know, to double check everyone's like on the same page. So yeah, it's just like a number of stuff that might happen in a day.
Yeah, and I guess my day starts off very similar to Eva. So stand-ups with the engineering team and design, everyone talking about what they're going to be doing for the day, what they achieved from the previous day. And then kind of like Samarth, the day would depend completely on where you are in the quarter, what quarter you're in. But it would be either talking to users as well, checking designs with designers, checking in with them. Maybe we need to, figure something out that's not been accounted for. Again, talking to stakeholders, reviewing what's gone out, either giving some bad news on a feature or like talking about what's coming up next and what to be excited for and what we might need them for. Also talking to other PMs and being like, hey, we need I don't know, an API from your team, or we need this piece of work being done in your team to unlock us like down the line for our team to work on this feature. So yeah, it's completely different. I try and make a to-do list at the beginning of each day and block out my calendar, because I will always forget what needs to be done. But it's a lot of reporting what's happening right now, checking in what's happened before, and also just planning for the future. And that's kind of just the continuous cycle of what's happening.
So I noticed Sian and Samarth both mentioned like users and user testing. I was wondering if you could talk about what user testing at the FT looks like, and also what is user testing?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to take this one. So user testing at the FT, and well, I'll start with user testing in general. So it's a process that is, I think, very closely attached to design and what the work product designers are doing typically, in that we will try to put some, depending on the fidelity level and how confident we are in what we want to build, some version of what we're hoping to build and put out to market or as a product later down in front of our users and get their feedback and impressions and reactions to it. And that can be at very different levels. Sometimes we just want a sense check. Is this solving a problem that you think you might have? And it's a sketch and it's very rough and kind of high level. And sometimes it's really focused on gathering feedback on very specific elements. And then we would run a more structured usability test, essentially, where we ask our participants who we recruit to give us feedback, who are typically users in our use our product, but not always, to sort of go through an interface or a prototype and say, hey, click through these things. While you're going through, did that make sense? Did you have any questions? Did it work? Sometimes it's not even a question of just trying to understand like larger questions. Is it just, does it make sense to walk through and navigate? And that kind of input is a really valuable source of just direction in terms of like, are we ready to move ahead with this? Can we, have we gotten feedback that's all positive and great? If not, what did we learn? What do we need to do about what we learned? So any kind of input that we can gather to test our thinking and validate any hypotheses we have. In terms of at the FT, we have a couple of different, I'll talk more about tools at the moment. And then of course there's processes that differ between teams and things like that. We use a tool pretty often called usertesting.com, which is a platform or site that lets us sort of create an experience where we have people go through sort of tasks and missions. So that can help us really customize, like, oh, if we've got an app prototype or a website prototype or just a sketch or feedback we want on certain screens, we can design this test in a way where people go through and click through and have to give us responses, sometimes verbal responses, clicking on things, all kinds of tasks. So that platform is really versatile and kind of useful for us. We also use quantitative tools as well. There's a tool called Qualtrics, which is a survey tool typically. So we can put out surveys on the site, send them out to our users, and we'll gather information on questions we have relating to a product or question through that as well. So quantitative, qualitative, we've got a couple of different sort of tools in our toolkit, depending on like what the question really is at the time. Yeah, and then I guess I'll just take a step back really quickly and say there's also like research in the like implementation and product and testing, and then there's sometimes research that's just strategy driven and is much more closely aligned with like the future of the product and may not be so testing focused. Yeah.
Thank you. Sian, did you want to add anything or no?
No, Samarth went into a lot of details. It's all good. I'm tend to be there listening in more than anything.
We've actually had a few questions come in for you, Sian. So my first question for you is, did you find any like Agile Scrum qualifications helped you in your day-to-day job get to where you are now or progress in your career as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess Samarth has kind of already spoken about like it's good to know the right way or the like best way to do things. I wouldn't say that I use, like I got put on a course when I first started, and I wouldn't say I used it every day. It's quite dense. And Agile and Scrum, it's good to know the language, but you kind of like, I guess you need to know the rules in order to break them, kind of thing. The day-to-day, like Scrum is really hard to follow in a business. It's not really aligned with stakeholders, and stakeholders don't really understand it. But it's always good to know the language and what the best process is supposed to look like. But that being said, Scrum is by no means like the best process, and Agile is no means by the best process for a company. Waterfall might be better for a company in some situations. But yeah, I think it's always good to know the right way, in quotation marks, in order to know how to break the rules more than anything. But they're expensive, and so I wouldn't like invest too much money into a course. I've never been asked if I have a qualification in like, I think it's the PSPO course, the Scrum courses. No one really cares about that. I mean, it's nice to have it as like a stamp on your CV, but never been really asked about that because, yeah, like I said, in day-to-day PMing, you can't really follow it. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. And do you think there are any transferable skills if anyone's currently a developer and they're thinking of becoming like a product manager?
I guess it's kind of hard for me to talk about because I am by no means an engineer. I cannot code for the life of me. I can string together some SQL and that's about it. But for example, our product director used to be an engineer, and he is mentoring people that want to kind of go into PMing. So there definitely are transferable skills, especially I guess the more senior you get, because you are working with stakeholders and you are looking into like problems and like solutionizing on problems, as well as like taking a bit more of that responsibility. So I couldn't speak directly for like engineering to product management, but yeah, I've definitely seen people do it. And I think I'm also not a technical PM. I think if you are looking to go into being a technical PM, there's going to be a lot of crossover. You're going to want to need, like, they're going to need someone that's a bit more technical, which is why I think, yeah, engineers that want to look into PMing, maybe a technical engineer is a good kind of way to get into it.
Nice, thank you. And I actually love this next question that's come up. Someone's asked about how often is it that you'll find that there are situations where there's conflict between what the stakeholders want and, let's say, what the engineers can do? Like, is that common?
No, actually, engineers are far too accommodating at times, and their answer to me is anything's possible. And then it's like, okay, but how long is that going to take us? Because they do want to kind of give everyone everything all the time. So what you're dealing with is not necessarily what is like technically possible, because they'll be like, anything is technically possible if you give them long enough. It's very much like what's possible in the time frame we have, and also is it building towards the product vision that we've all agreed to, because sometimes stakeholders would want something that is kind of taking you away, and it just really doesn't align in, like, because sometimes they get very specific, and you kind of have to pull them back a little bit and be like, we can deliver this requirement, but it's going to be like, it's probably not going to take that shape because it's not going towards the product vision. But yeah, engineers are like far too accommodating and sometimes would hack too much to keep stakeholders happy, and that's the thing you have to kind of pull them back a little bit for.
I've definitely experienced that myself as an engineer. And I guess Samarth and Eva, do you like, we can ask you the same question actually around like conflict between, you know, stakeholders and, you know, engineers or something as well, or yourself, you know, your role.
I guess I can go first. Yeah, it's not so much conflict as like, I think there's always going to be like different, not agendas, but people are going to want different things. And it's, you know, there's going to be a solution. There's always a solution to something. And it's just about like talking enough and like deciding on like one specific solution that kind of hopefully aligns with like everyone's goals. Like, it's easier said than done, but I think going into stuff like that, that's what I'm always trying to do, because there are so many ways to design something. So when there have been like, not conflicts, but like disagreements about like the way forward, it's almost like, okay, well, let's just sit down and like talk about it, because if you don't, like, you're not going to get anywhere. And I've experienced that too. But yeah, it's always like a way to talk it out, I think. I don't know if that's helpful to say that, but yeah.
Yeah, I would just, I don't know if I have too much to add other than just, yeah, trade-offs and questions of like what makes sense for, and what is like an ideal compromise. And it's never perfect. It's not like us, it's kind of like a art, science, what is it kind of thing, because especially from like a research standpoint, you're hearing from customers and like understanding like problems they have, and then you're trying to sometimes come up with solutions for them, and then those don't perfectly align, and then it's really a question of like, are we solving the right problem, or are we solving for the user, for the business? You can cut it so many different ways, and I think it's just important to be present in those conversations and try to find a way to like inject your point of view and expertise and have like a healthy kind of discussion about it, as opposed to just you know, slinking off unhappy that your way wasn't had, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Someone's asked, is there ever like a disconnect between what the stakeholders say they want but what they actually need? Okay, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I think so. This is a great question. And I'd be curious to hear if Sian and Eva have additional thoughts. But yeah, I think just we will sometimes hear like, oh, we need to build this feature, and it's come from stakeholders higher up who are really focused on like really key parts of the business. And that's like driving towards a want of like, okay, we need to do this for this reason. But sometimes you don't, I don't know, from a research point at least, like you don't have to go back and create something new to achieve the same outcomes. You can reconfigure what you have, you can improve the current experience. It's not always about just like, oh, this new thing needs to exist, and this is the hottest discussion and biggest trend in tech, and we need to make this. I think there's other ways to add value. So the need want thing is really interesting, and something that, just a tangent, is like what we're always trying to pass out from users. where they say they want something, but is that what they really need? So probably applicable in different scenarios.
Yeah, kind of similar, I guess, with being a PM and talking to stakeholders, you really want to pull them back to like the problem rather than come to you with a solution. That's not even, my job. That is Eva's and the engineering job. And for Samarth to kind of input in, we do not go with like solutions. We very much go with the problem and the problem space. And, there's many different ways to solve a problem. So when stakeholders come with like a specific feature that they want and a specific solution, you try and pull them back, and you're like, okay, what triggered this want? Like what happened that made you want this? And try and really like unpick their thinking a little bit, and be like, okay, let's go with and see if we can take it with that problem, and kind of pull it back to the problem space instead of like going forward with a solution, because that's not my job, to kind of dictate a solution to the team.
Yeah, I'd second that completely. And the only other thing to add, that in my experience, sometimes when stakeholders say that and you do what Sian says, is like you unpick it and you're like, but why? But why? And you just keep asking, and it just turns out that they didn't actually sometimes even mean what they, if you keep asking, it actually turns out that it's something completely different to what they, because that's the fun with language, right? Like you I think understand what, when you're talking to someone, you keep asking, that it's actually something else that they think they want. But yeah, definitely keep away from like solutionizing and try and like be like, well, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? And then we'll discuss how to solve it. You just give us the problem and we'll like figure it out as a team.
Amazing, thank you. We've got a few questions now for you, Eva. The first one is, how do you visualize your designs for the engineers?
So there are many different ways. It depends like what stage and like how quickly you need to do something. I've literally done things on napkins over lunch before, like there's been Sketch, and then Sketch kind of went out the window and now it's Figma, but it will be like a design program, and the problem with that, just to warn you all, you can kind of see inside like the designer's madness, because like it's infinite boards and then you've got like pages. So sometimes if you're not super organized, it can be like a mad space for an engineer to work in. So usually I would try and label things up really obviously, and there's also like commenting tools as well, so you can like at someone's name and then they can just follow you to that specific board, and then you can leave comments to each other and chat like that. But it will be in like my field, like it is currently Figma, and there is like a tab for developers as well, where it actually gives you some of the code as well, which I've heard is like helpful, but I think past a certain point it's just not created in a way that's super useful for engineers, but it is like a good foundation, I guess. So there is, but yeah, the program is Figma, and there are links, and I can like, designers will send you to those boards, where you can like discuss those.
I'm actually going to share a YouTube video of Figma. So we noticed actually that Figma was becoming this really big tool, and actually it was a workshop that we ran actually during Codebar Festival, which was Figma for Everyone, and it's a really nice like workshop, and it's running through how to use something like Figma, how to dig into the code elements so you can get colors, hex values and RGB values from the files, and it's actually really interesting. So yeah, you kept mentioning Figma, so I thought, oh, actually I'm sure there is a video there, so I've just shared a link to it as well.
And it's actually really useful to like learn just a little bit about how to use it and how to use the tools and how to like even just do boxes or text, because I've noticed in the past engineers have like wanted to like visualize what they're talking about in a way that obviously I can't. So it's always been useful if like they know a little bit about it and they can like help like put something on the canvas essentially to like get their ideas across. So it is useful to like pick it up a little bit if you can be bothered.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I really like it as a tool actually, Figma, and we've used it quite a few times at Codebar as well for various projects. So yeah, someone's asked, and this is for everyone, could you share how you've tackled a difficult challenge in your current role? And it doesn't necessarily have to be at the FT. It could just be your role in general, but how you've tackled a challenge in your role.
I can go first.
Yeah.
So in a previous role, I came in, this is actually at Coro Kids, I came in and the call to action said invite to chat. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting way just to say message. Can we change it to message, please? Because that's what it was, and that invite to chat, it like loads of user tests came back saying like people didn't really understand what that meant or how it worked. And it just turned out that it was like an impossible change to make due to like the infrastructure of the back end. They're like, well, if we change it here, actually it's like connected to states in the back end, and it like runs a bunch of other stuff, and like it just seemed insane. So the first thing that I did was jokingly with my team was just like, oh, it's my birthday next week, so can I just have a birthday week where like we just do stuff that I want, and then when it's your birthday we can do this thing in the team where like it will be your birthday week, and then if you've got like gripes or little like things you want to change. So kind of started off as a joke, but then that kind of became a thing where we just in the team had birthday weeks where if it was feasible that person could change, and the other members of the team would change it. So it's about like trying to make things fun and doing things a little bit differently, but it actually, because it was so difficult to change, the team kind of got together and went to the stakeholders and went, actually we just kind of need to rewrite this whole code base, and it took a little while, it took a quarter, but we basically talked the business into almost starting again, because it just uncovered so many other things where it's like if little changes take that long to do and are impossible, imagine about the big stuff. Like there's no like flexibility in this at all. It's not future proofed. So it started off little and then it just kind of snowballed. But yeah, there's just think outside the box sometimes if you get desperate to make the changes.
And yeah, I guess a little similar at a previous company. It kind of came top down for a feature, and it was a very big feature. I worked at the fintech. It was like a property fintech, and they wanted to enable, like on Rightmove where you have alerts for when properties come up. They wanted that, and that was a big piece of work. We had nothing in the back end for that. It would have taken a long time to do that, and there was no user research saying that it's wanted. No one was saying that it's lacking. No one was saying that they want it. And so I basically went to the designer and we had a chat, and she was like, let's do a fake door test. And so we did a fake door test, which is essentially a button with nothing behind it. And it's basically, it's a very quick way as well to do some user research, because again, in a startup, you don't have user research all the time. And if you do, they're usually on other projects. And this is something that, was so much time and effort like in the back end. And we kind of knew we didn't want to do it, but we needed to kind of get something concrete to tell the stakeholders like this is not worth the time. And so we put a fake door test up, and basically when you clicked it, it would have just said this feature's coming soon, we'll keep you posted, and collected those emails. And I think it was like less than 1% of visitors to the site clicked on it, and so we were like, I don't think this is wanted, guys. And they were like, yeah, I don't think it's wanted either. And we're like, yeah, okay, cool. We can drop that, and we can think of something else work on the rest of our roadmap to go on. So yeah, a lot of thinking outside the box, but leaning very heavily on the designer with that as well.
Yeah, I can share an example from my previous role. I was working on a project, and I feel like this can come up in different circumstances. Our client at the time came in with a very kind of clear brief of, hey, we want to learn these things, and I have this hunch that this is what we should do next, and kept sort of throughout the process trying to like push that hunch, even though we were trying to touch and explore lots of different things. And it was a project in healthcare, and So it was a bit tricky because I think we were struggling as researchers to find a way to like tell like the true story of what we were hearing, and then there's constant feedback from a stakeholder who wanted like validation for this idea that they had, this hypothesis they had, and it was sort of going in a different direction. And I think what we did, which is not terribly innovative or creative, but I think is just a good learning, is just involvement in the process, like actively throughout. So when we were planning, like making sure this person's voice was heard, clarifying why we were doing things a certain way. When we got into interviews, giving this stakeholder of ours like a certain job to do. So like when we were running interviews, like I would be asking questions, and then we asked our stakeholder to like keep an eye out for like certain notes or things that our participants would be saying, and like taking notes and like pulling out themes, and really like involving people in the process of like gathering research and getting really connected with the user story and experience. And I think I would say that's like a good learning just for now as well, like across all disciplines, trying to bring people into the room when you're talking to someone who actually uses what you are all kind of working to build. And that can really generate a different kind of connection with the problem you're solving than text on a screen or like a video clip or something like that. It's really nice to be involved. And I think if you can give someone a role or something that feels important as part of that process, can help. So long story long, we ended up essentially just trying to involve the stakeholder a lot. They sort of started to see the value of the kinds of questions we were asking, and then we were sort of aligned on the same page like thereafter. So it was managing conflict and differences in opinions by just trying to talk things out. That was my takeaway. Yeah.
Nice, thank you. We've got a question now for you, Eva. How important is it for front-end developers to have an eye for design and visuals?
It's not that important. It's almost like what's more important is like a willingness to not to try, but like just some interest in it, because I think, you know, it's not everyone's cup of tea. Like I can't code. I've tried to code. Previous bosses are like, please go on coding course. I just can't, it's just not that part of my brain. But I'm really interested in it from the point of view of like the constraints and understanding it enough to like for it to inform my work. So I think like for engineers, it's not that important. Like if it interests you and if you're good at it, like that helps. But in terms of like, if you didn't want to get involved, like you don't need to. It really just depends. But it's not like, if you are, it's helpful. But if you're not, it's not going to like hold me back, and it's not going to like impact the types of conversations that we have. I've had engineers before that just haven't cared about it at all, and the only time that it impacts is when I do a design and then it's coded and it just doesn't look anything like it, and I'm like, oh, I kind of just, I know you don't care, but like, just make it look like, at least make it look like the thing. So like care enough to make it look like the design, but other than that, like it doesn't matter too much if you're not interested in it.
I think that's a fair request. You know, you've spent a lot of time making this thing look good, so then the engineer should then make it look like that.
Yeah, like that. Like you don't have to change. Like, yeah, if you've got like opinions enough to like want to change it, like let's chat about that. Because I've had that before with engineers being like, oh, I don't really want to tell you, but I have this in my head and I saw it differently and I think it could look better this way. But I didn't want to like say anything, and I'm like, always tell me, like, because I can always say no, but I would love like the input. So there's always that, like if you feel like you have got an opinion, like don't be afraid to like share it. Don't get offended if it doesn't get used, but like don't be afraid to.
Because that was going to be my next question, was how much input do the engineers have in one of your designs?
Well, I'm speaking personally because I do know designers who, oh God, who might potentially take offense. But hopefully most of them won't, and I don't, but like I welcome like constructive feedback and suggestions from anyone. We all have eyes and opinions, and I like take that seriously. Like if I design something, I'm not going to like discount it because I didn't have the idea. And also I'm not going to take offense, because it's not like, you're not attacking my character, you just have opinions about a thing that I did, and that's cool. So for me, like, have as much input, like constructive input, as you want. Don't just tell me it's awful and then walk away, because that's not helpful. Like if you're going to tell me it's bad, like tell me why, and then at least, yeah, tell me why. You don't have to like come up with a suggestion, but it's like, this doesn't work, and then just have a good thing to back it up with, and then
It's interesting because in my previous company, I've not developed now in a while because of codebar, but in my previous company, I worked at Hive, the British Gas smart thermostat company, and we got handed a design, and the way the designers had designed it, controlling the temperature in your home, was through like a coloured bar graph. So you would move it and the heating would change just based on a colour. And one of our engineers, who I didn't know was colourblind, and he said, this doesn't make any sense to me. And he was like, why can't it just be a number? Most people would control the temperature of their home using a number. Like, why are we overcomplicating this? And the designers were like, but it looks really nice. And he was like, but I can't use this. Like, I cannot use this because the colors are not what you think they are, because I'm not seeing them like that. And he was like, I'm not telling you to change the design, because the bar does look nice, but can we also have a number? And actually he ended up changing having a huge influence in what the final product ended up looking like. And I think it's also really interesting and a huge reason why you need diversity on a team, because had he not been on our team, that could have got built. And then how many people use Hive? Like millions of people around the country are controlling the temperatures in their home using Hive products. And it was just so interesting, because he just went back to the designers and he was like, I can't see this. Like, it's literally just
grey.
Yeah, like it's just a grey bar.
That's amazing. There is and if designers aren't using it, there are plugins for like accessibility and just making sure like it's not all grey and stuff. So there are things, hopefully, but yeah, you need to think of them. Like, you don't know what you don't know. So
so we are about to wrap up. If anyone's got any quick last questions, please do shoot them over. Someone said, what format do you enjoy working in, UI or UX? I'm going to guess that's for you, Eva.
It's a really interesting one, because I always loved psychology and I was going to do that at uni, and then I didn't, so I loved that. And then I did graphic design, so I was always stronger in UI, but because I was stronger, I felt like had a bit of a complex, so I tried really hard with UX. So now like I'm like trying to level myself out, but I genuinely enjoy both equally, and I can't imagine doing one without the other, because how can you know, who cares if it's just pretty? Like, it's not, so yeah, both. That's not helpful.
Both. I like that. That's both. You don't need to choose. Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for being here today and giving these really useful insights into your roles.